I'm really concerned about a lot of the challenges of our times that aren't being met. I'm a U.S. Coast Guard veteran. I've served in local government as an attorney, tackling many of the local issues that we deal with, from housing to infrastructure projects and protecting our environment. And look, we just have a lot of challenges right now that are not being addressed by our current representative. That includes protecting a woman's right to have the dignity and control over her own body, including the right to determine when and if she's going to become a mother. That includes addressing gun violence that we see erupting around the nation and these senseless gun laws like permitless carry that was enacted here in South Carolina. And that also includes investing in our infrastructure here in the Low Country. We have a current representative who voted against infrastructure funding, but then showed up to take credit for it for when that money came in. And I can tell you from working in local government, we have a lot of investment that must be made in local infrastructure if we're going to have a sustainable community here in the Low Country. Yeah, so I am a U.S. Coast Guard veteran. I was a federal law enforcement officer in the Coast Guard. I was stationed in Baltimore, Maryland as a Coast Guard police officer. Became a fully certified Coast Guard police officer at 19. And here in Charleston, I was the lead boarding officer. I was a law enforcement instructor. So part of my job was to go out and board container ships. I'm the only candidate in this race that's actually protected and defended a border, our maritime borders. So my job was to go out, board container ships, search for illegal drugs and other things that would harm us in keeping our ports safe, respond to search and rescue calls. But I also am a graduate of the Citadel. I went to the Charleston School of Law, so I'm a product of Low Country educational institutions. After law school, I worked as an in-house attorney for a publicly traded tech company headquartered here in Charleston. Actually the same company as my opponent, where he was head of DEI. We kind of overlapped briefly there. But then I returned to public service. I was an attorney for the town of Mount Pleasant. I was the #2 attorney there, and then I was also the general counsel for the town of Hilton Head Island. So I have a lot of experience working on, again, local issues. I have worked on affordable housing and attainable housing projects in this district. I'm actually actively working right now on behalf of a very well-known municipality in Beaufort County to bring a large-scale attainable housing project to that community. I've worked on road and bridge projects, as well as drafted environmental legislation that's aimed at protecting our waterways. Well, I think that the first thing that the 119th Congress, the next Congress, when it is sworn in on January 3rd, that they must do is introduce legislation codifying a woman's right to make her own decision with regard to her own reproductive choices. That's a personal issue for me because I know the impacts of that firsthand. My family was torn apart in 1960 when my grandmother, at 31 years old, lost her life to a backroom abortion because she was denied access to a safe legal procedure. That unfortunately broke my family up. My mother was one of 8 children. She was 5.5 when she lost her mother. And as a result, she was sent into a broken foster care system where she suffered years of abuse and trauma and wasn't adopted until she was 12. So we're still living with a lot of those traumas from that time era. And since 1960, we had a lot of things happen in this country. We had the Civil Rights Act, we had the Voting Rights Act, we had Roe v. Wade, the Roe v. Wade decision, and now we're starting to see a rollback, and not just in women's rights, but also now with regards to voting as well. And so we see sort of this theme that the times from the 50s and 60s is coming back to present day. I would also say that another big issue that I'm very concerned about is gun violence. It's the leading cause of death amongst children. We have a lot of gun violence in our communities here in the Low Country, and the South Carolina Republican-led state legislator decided it was a good idea to enact permitless carry. That makes no one safer. As a former law enforcement officer, I can tell you that that does not make anyone safer, and it makes no sense why we would want to encourage people that don't know anything about firearms, that have not been through a background check, to carry a loaded firearm that is capable of taking someone's life instantly with absolutely no checks and balances in place. So I'm very committed to enacting sensible gun reform, and I say that as a gun owner myself. These are not laws that are going to take guns out of law-abiding citizens' hands. Universal background checks, safe storage requirements, red flag laws, these are all laws that are going to help protect our communities. But it also means getting some laws off the books. The Charleston loophole, which facilitated the individual who committed the atrocity at the Mother Emanuel Church, the gun that was used during that tragedy was actually procured because of a loophole in our federal laws that says you can get a gun. If your background check doesn't come back within 3 days, the gun dealer can sell you the gun. And that's exactly what happened in that case. We also have a federal law that prohibits the funding of a digital gun registry. And so what that means is when a gun is recovered that has been used in a crime and they send that information to the ATF, the ATF has to send somebody in a warehouse in West Virginia, and they go through a whole warehouse of paper files to try to find the information of that gun. And it can delay law enforcement's ability to solve critical crimes. And lastly, I would just say on infrastructure, we have a housing crisis here in our district. A lot of people cannot afford to live where they work and work where they live. So I'm committed to making sure that we get some federal funding here in our district for attainable housing projects for both rent and home ownership, but also investing in our infrastructure, making sure that we are better prepared for the effects of climate change, but also from natural disasters like hurricanes and other storm events, because I feel that right now we are inadequately prepared to deal with any sort of massive storm event, and we are very vulnerable here in the Lowcountry. Well, I would say there is another veteran on the other side of the ticket, but I'm I served in the U.S. Coast Guard here on our waterways. And so, again, I'm the only candidate that's protected a maritime border. So when we talk about the issues related to border security, I have firsthand frontline experience on that issue. I would also say that I have a demonstrated career of public service. This isn't something that I've just talked about or have been inspired about all my life and then decided to do it. Later on, when I was 18 years old, I enlisted in the Coast Guard and decided that I was going to commit my life to public service. So, I actually have experience working on the things that we want to see movement from our congressional representative. When you get to Congress, they don't hand you a binder that tells you everything you need to know. You have to know who the stakeholders are. You have to have the ability to work collaboratively in a bipartisan manner so that you can actually get things done. And so when we talk about infrastructure projects that is much needed here in this district, I believe that I'm the best candidate and best suited to address those issues and bring the necessary resources to bear and to collaborate with the state and local counterparts to bring that to the Lowcountry. Well, I believe, we had under Roe v. Wade national protection. It was the law of the land that it was a woman's right, to seek an abortion and to make the determination when and if she's going to become a mother. I do believe that, that protection needs to be codified into federal law. I don't believe it should be a states' right issue. It should be up to every woman in this country to make that own decision for herself. And so, as I have mentioned before, the first thing that Congress must do is introduce legislation codifying Roe v. Wade or some equivalent type of statute, because at the end of the day, this is about protecting the dignity of an individual to make their own decisions regarding their own body. And I believe that we're already seeing a slippery slope here where Donald Trump, somebody that Nancy Mace supports, has greenlit saying that red states should have the ability to monitor women's pregnancies. And that's a very dangerous, slippery slope that I feel we're headed down. And we need to bring the essence of Roe v. Wade back and provide a national protection for women in this country. I don't feel very strongly about age limits. I think that, there are people that are in their 90s that are sharp as a tack. I know a gentleman down in Beaufort County, and he is in his 90s, and he is one of the smartest, sharpest guys that I know. However, I am a supporter of term limits. I think that you have to balance the ability to facilitate new ideas and energy going into Congress with the benefits of having experience in the House. So I don't think they need to be very short term limits, but I think that if they are long enough to allow a member to gain experience, have some influence, and be able to get things done, that I would be supportive of term limits in some fashion. But absolutely for the United States Supreme Court. I believe that a lifetime appointment really facilitates a bench where you may have justices that are completely out of touch with the American sentiment, and also with judicial philosophies that change over time. So I think that having longer term limits for Supreme Court justices is a good thing to ensure that they have some sense of political independence, although we don't seem to see that right now with lifetime appointments with some of the justices. So I do support term limits for the Supreme Court. Yes. Well, I don't just talk to Democrats when I'm out campaigning. And at the end of the day, I'm running for U.S. Congress. I'm running to be a congressional representative for everyone here in the Low Country, not just to Democrats. So that means that I'm out talking with independents and Republicans as well. And I think that people, by and large, want to see a congressional representative that they can be proud of. And they also want to see someone who they can depend on to be consistent. And they're not getting that with their current representative. I mean, someone who shows up to take credit for infrastructure money that's coming in when they voted against that very bill, I think just screams of hypocrisy, and they don't want to see that. And I think people also want to see, again, someone that they can be proud in, somebody that represents them well. I think that you should want to be proud of when you see your congressional representative advocating for the Low Country. You want to be proud of how they're conducting themselves. And I think people want to see less of the reality TV nature of what politics has become today, and they want to see more public servants in office. And so at the end of the day, they want results. And so, this is a district that is very independent-minded. I mean, we elected Mark Sanford after he was governor. Then we turned around and elected Joe Cunningham, a Democrat. Then we turned around and elected Nancy Mace. And I do believe that in November we will be electing a Democrat. Yes, so I will say I support foreign aid to both Ukraine and Israel. With regard to Ukraine, people need to understand, and those like Nancy Mace who are calling for all these restrictions on aid to Ukraine really need to understand the concept of collective security. The United States, whether we like it or not, we have global obligations that if we do not meet, it will destroy our country. So we have to support Ukraine against Russian aggression. Russia is not a friend of the United States. Putin is not a friend of the United States. And so if Ukraine falls, our NATO allies are next. And if our NATO allies get attacked, the United States is at war. So I believe that we must do everything we can to support Ukraine. When it comes to Israel, I do believe that is a very complex conflict that really is a lot, in many ways misunderstood. However, I do think that you can support Israel. Israel is a friend of the United States. The Israeli people are friends of the United States. I do not agree with how the Israeli government is conducting its military operations. I do not condone the mass killings of innocent civilians. And so I think you can support Israel and not support how the Israeli government is carrying out its operations. That said, I believe Israel has every right to self-defense. It has every right to go after the terrorists that are responsible for the attacks on October the 7th. And I believe that we should help them in that endeavor. However, the Israeli government needs to understand that the American people do not support the killing of innocent civilians, and therefore they must adjust their military operations accordingly. When I look at a candidate, I look at their commitment to public service. On the Democratic side, voters have two options, myself and my opponent. And I have a demonstrated history of public service and a deep commitment to public service that I've exhibited all my life. Definitely all my adult life, from enlisting in the military and also serving our local communities here. And at the end of the day, I would say to voters that if you want a congressional representative who's going to work with a lot of vigor and energy to meet the challenges of our times, then please vote for me, Mac Deford, on June 11th. Yeah, I would just say that I think voters should get out, try to meet their candidates. I always tell folks, please give me a call. You can go on our website. We have a phone number. It's defordforcongress.com is our website. You can go on there. You can call the number and leave a message if no one picks up, and I will call you back. And so please come out to our events, get to know the candidates, because at the end of the day, people need to get involved in our elections. We need to have people voting. People need to make sure that their voice is heard. And I'll say this too, I mean, primaries are very important. You can't just show up for the Super Bowl, all right? The general election's the Super Bowl, primaries are the playoffs. Playoffs are just as important because that will determine who is going to go up against the other party in November. And I would say that this is a district that can be flipped by a Democrat, but it's going to require, to be an effective member of Congress, to be an effective representative for this district, it's going to require a Democrat who can act and lead in a bipartisan manner to get results for the Lowcountry.